Dr. Shadrach, ladies and gentlemen on the dais, Mr. Osama Manzar, whose first name I love to call out with great pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to be here amongst all of you, especially because libraries is a subject which is very close to my heart. And as Dr. Shadrach suggested, it is something which draws an emotional chord deep inside most of our hearts. I remember as a small boy growing up in Lucknow and studying in La Martiniere there, the British Council Library was the most sought out refuge for all of us for several reasons. One, it was the only air-conditioned place in those days, so when you had to escape from the hot summer loo, this was the best place to be in. While climbing up to the library, you could also peep inside Mayfair Theatre and see whatever film was running. The quality restaurant was close by, and this was the quietest place and the neatest place in the city. This was also the place which was a treasure trove of literature, of periodicals, and I remember that to a large part, my learning at that stage was entirely thanks to that library. Later, when I got into the IAS and several years down the lane, I was commissioner of the Housing Board in Madhya Pradesh, and amongst the various buildings of the Housing Board was a building which housed the British Council Library in Bhopal. And one fine day, I read in the newspaper that BCL Bhopal was winding up. There was a massive agitation in the city from all intellectuals, many of whom I knew rather well, and they all asked me to talk about this subject, to agitate with the state government, not only because a building of the Housing Board was going to be vacated, but because this was a tremendous intellectual loss for the capital city of Madhya Pradesh. So I remember at that stage writing a huge blog about it, that please don't leave us and so on. I agitated with the state government, and fortunately, and this is one example of a success story, where a participative state government came forward and said that we will run the BCL, because British Council was adamant. They said, it didn't fit in with their larger resource cut and budgetary crunches and so on. And so it's been renamed as the Vivekananda Library Foundation, irrespective of the name, which is wonderful. The fact is that the library is very much on terra firma. It's running very well, in a very civilized manner. Books are being procured, and people do go there. The level of participation is still there and is perhaps symptomatic of the overall challenge which libraries all over the world are facing, but that library is doing well. I also remember another small personal anecdote of the time when I went to Harvard University to do my master's as a mid-career civil servant, and Cambridge City, where the Kennedy School of Government is housed, has an enormous public library. And I remember my family and we were, at least for several days, we relied on that library and we went there very often. And so the entire concept of libraries is, I think, it evokes a chord and resonates not just with me, but with all of us. And so let me begin by saying that this entire effort, which has been which has been created by DEF, the DELNET, by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and all these stakeholders whom I can't possibly name, but who've been part of this tremendous yagya. They have really to be, thanked for this great initiative. And I think this should be an annual feature and a great point to start with. Friends, having said that, I would like to go back to what Dr. Shadrach has read out as the broad draft recommendations of the discussions and deliberations that all of you have had. I couldn't agree more with all of them. And I think they're absolutely on the mark. And certainly, as a financial advisor who has some say in the overall scheme of things, I will be very happy to advocate that they should form the backdrop and the basis for the larger functioning of the entire library budget of the Ministry of Culture. You know, your recommendations about the functioning of, and I'll take each of these issues quickly, and so that so the first one, public libraries should conform to the UNESCO guidelines and look after the communities based on their needs. I couldn't agree more with you. Today you have to have libraries which relate to the community, and some of these libraries, as you mentioned, the ones in Tamil Nadu, several others that I'm aware of, are conforming broadly to these guidelines, but certainly they need to be looked at very closely, both in terms of things like gender equality, of social inclusion, and you know, the manner in which they are run. Caring for people with disabilities, absolutely, pat on the mark. I can find no fault with it. A Federal Public Library Act guidelines should be developed. Yes, I think that is indeed very necessary, except that I'm a little wary of you know, laws, because once you create a law, you become a victim of those laws, and everything becomes judiciable, and half your time goes in trying to deal with court cases which emanate out of those laws. I think we are a highly legislated country, and it's you know, time that we built in all these into our executive scheme of things. But certainly the thought, the sentiment is very well taken, and some broad guidelines should develop, which should be like standards, which should be replicated all across the country, across the library framework. And the third one, the apex body, RRLF, needs to be relooked at, and the stakeholder, multi-stakeholder contribution should increase. Certainly that deserves a very close look, and it's a very valid observation. And the cost-benefit analysis of their schemes requires to be carried out to assess its effectiveness. Certainly a valid observation. Funding, in India, public library fund should be created to, you know, tap the CSR resources under Section 135 of the Companies Act, as modified in 2013, should be managed by multi-stakeholders. We already have a national culture fund, and along those lines, it makes sense to have an India Public Library Fund. I'm sure the ministry would like to look at you know, a concept like this, where different companies can contribute to this. For instance, you know, I mean, we have in India today some private sector entities which are closely involved with libraries. In the US, I was reading about the university, about the city of Philadelphia, where the William Penn Foundation has taken on and contributed hugely to the, you know, maintenance and upkeep and sustenance of that library. So all these things need to be really worked on, and having a large corporate thing like this would make sense. India Public Library campaign should be initiated by the public. Yes, it makes sense, and you must involve, and this is something which falls well within, you know, your domain, to get all your stakeholders to bring out suitable advertisements in the social media, everywhere, and to create public awareness about the need for libraries more than anything else, and for need for reading. And today we find that, and it's a problem which afflicts all our homes, that we find that our children are really not attracted to literature anymore. So and you know, going to a library is really not something which would excite them. They would much rather go to a cinema hall or a mall to do shopping or even to shop on the internet. So how do we excite families to be attracted towards reading, towards the library system, and how can that become more useful? So really, libraries have to become centers of innovation. They have to become centers of participation. Today we have startups coming up all over the country, and India is one of the leaders in that field. Internet startups, so certainly libraries should become, ideally, it may be a little far-fetched, but should become incubation centers for entrepreneurship and startups, so that they can attract young talent, because young startups do not have place to sit, and yet you have libraries which have so much space which is today unfilled and where there are not enough readers. So maybe they can carve out little, cubicles, or at least put round tables around which people can sit and discuss, and those areas can be segregated from the areas which are silence areas, so that people can discuss, talk, and have support systems where people can give them advice on funding, people can give them advice on various other facets of a startup, and so on, with the support of people who are in that field. Community needs and aspirations should form the basis of collection development, hence a blend of centralized, decentralized procurement to be encouraged. I fully agree with this. Infrastructure, maintenance, refurbishment of public libraries would need to be carried out throughout the nation. In fact, the national mission on libraries is already doing that in a limited way, and I'm privy to the fact that we have sanctioned funds for various district and state libraries to refurbish them, to modernize them, to digitalize them, to create the infrastructure where they can become more participative centers of learning. And I don't remember the names, but several such libraries have received funds, including the national libraries, the bigger ones like the CSL, the Khudabakhsh, the Thanjavir Library, and so on. Then, what Usama mentioned about, or somebody mentioned about creating suitable gender, systems, so that you have toilets and for women. All these are absolutely necessary, and nobody can dispute their validity. Information and communications technology, I think that's what Usama mentioned, and that I do agree. They should have broadband, they should become hot zones and Wi-Fi free zones. If Coffee Cafe Day can offer that, or if Starbucks can offer that, why not a public library? And you can create suitable, as of now, people are hesitant in doing all this because they perceive that they might be misused for accessing the wrong kind of sites. So you can build in strong firewalls, and that technology is abundantly available today. So that should be done. And the last is ICT applications in libraries are getting upgraded every now and then. State governments should organize regular training programs in coordination with best library organizations. So training is indeed very necessary, and I would again mention that under the National Library Mission, we have sanctioned a project on training of librarians. We've got some very good agencies to do it. Some of them have done outstanding work in this field, and I think that should make a difference. There is also a project that has been commissioned to find out and to survey 5,000 libraries. It's been commissioned through the IMRB, which is one of the well-known and creditworthy agencies, to conduct a survey of libraries across the country to figure out what their specific needs are, what the systems that need to be put in place. That should really, be supported by what you've said, and I think the ministry in the days to come should be able to build on that and make use of all your recommendations. So I think, with your support and with your, with the recommendations that you are making, I think that we should be able to graduate from, making libraries part not just of our heritage, but part of our, modern day development, making them community-centric and development-centric, and make them vibrant and part of our culture. I envisage a day where every metro station should have digital libraries, and where you can, borrow, a book on your Kindle, or you should be able to borrow a Kindle and be able to return it at another station, where you can borrow a book and return it at some other station. Ideally, you should have that at airports also, where you can, you should have kiosks and vending machines, borrow a book, return it at another airport, and at least for children to have hardbound books so that they can read at metros, airports while they are waiting for flights or trains, and rather than having them waste their time just watching other passengers, or hankering their mothers to buy them chocolates and toffees. So with these words, I'm once again indeed feeling enlightened and privileged to have been able to address you, to be able to hear your recommendations, and I wish you all the very best. Thank you.